You don't want some knucklehead picking up that phone because a law enforcement officer's a brother, a sister, their life is at stake. And you want really well-trained people manning cop line because cops are calling when they're in crisis. They need somebody good.
San Diego 911 emergency. You need to come right away. There's a man with a gun and it's loaded. Receiving emergency signal from 4 George 1141. Got a white female down. We need paramedics code, please. All available units roll code that way.
Welcome to the De-Escalation Conversations podcast. Today, I'm truly honored to have a man that I've gotten to know and have tons of respect for many different reasons that I'll share during this interview. Chuck Stringham is a retired 34-year veteran of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. In retirement, Chuck was looking for a way to give back to the profession that supported him for 34 years. And in January 2020, he found a cop line recruitment email from his retirement group email blast. He went to the website. He applied to be a listener. He went to listener training in June of 2020, and the rest, as they say, is history. Chuck is now the cop line training coordinator. And what I would like to start this conversation off with is, Chuck, tell us about Copline and what it is that you do as the training coordinator.
Thanks, Kerry. Thanks for having me. First of all, Copline is a 24/7 confidential crisis line for active or retired law enforcement officers, and also their families can call. And when they do call, they'll get a retired officer who has attended training to answer their call. And once again, everything is confidential, and we try and help them work through their problems.
That's awesome. So if an officer, either active or retired, or their family is in crisis, they can pick up the phone and
Yes.
give Copline a call. And what kind of, I'm trying to think of the plural for crises, would an officer typically call Copline for? Is there any kind of limitations or parameters around that?
There's no limitations. Basically, probably about 93 or 94% of our calls are just having a bad day. And I want to get something off my chest. They want to talk to somebody who's been in the trenches, which is why we all have to be retired to be listeners. Then a small percentage of callers are a little bit more escalated. They've had a family fight or an argument with their sergeant, or just something that has gone beyond the normal bad day. And the final percentage of callers are the ones who intend their call to Copline to be their last. That means they're in real crisis and they're really thinking about suicide.
So it works not just at a low level crisis, I've had a bad day, but all the way up through, I'm ready to pull the trigger, or I'm ready to put my plan into action.
Exactly.
What can people expect if I'm an officer and I'm calling up? What's this call going to be like? Let's say I'm experiencing a prolonged IA, internal affairs investigation, and it's just tearing me apart. Maybe I even think I'm out of this. I might lose my job. And I call Copline. What's that experience going to be like for me?
First thing they get is an officer who is most likely been through or knows somebody that's been through what they're going through. So once we get past I answer the calls, Copline, this is Chuck, what's going on? And that gives them an opportunity to fill in to me what's going on in their life. Once we get past a couple minutes, then they can start detailing their crisis, what's going on with them. And as you say, if it's an IA investigation, I can ask them questions like, Do you have anybody that you know that's going through it that can help you navigate what's going on? Or I can say something like, hey, I've been through one. I don't know what your department rules and regulations are, but I can tell you that it can be tough. So we can go from trying to get them to understand somebody that's in their life that can help them. And then maybe I can add some information from my life that helps them hopefully navigate what's going on.
That makes sense. Now, for 22 years, I was on the peer support team of San Diego Police. I retired after a 30-year career. For 22 of those years, I know that our criteria for the peer support team was that somebody had to have died as a direct result of your actions. And the officers on the department knew what the criteria was. So they knew that when we showed up at a scene, we'd been, and the vast majority of the times for our call outs was officer involved shootings. So when we showed up to an OIS, as you said, they knew we'd been in the trenches with them. What does Hotline do to help ensure that the listeners, the folks that are answering the phone for Hotline when an officer calls in, have been in the trenches? What kind of criteria do you have for that?
If a person's interested in becoming a Copline listener, they have to go to the website, www.copline.org, and fill out a volunteer questionnaire. And that questionnaire really details their experience as a law enforcement officer. We like to have them have at least 10 years of good, solid police experience. That includes work in the field and any other things. They can work the jails, they can work the courts, they can be a traffic officer, but we want to have a generally well-rounded 10-year experience. And usually an officer who spends 10 years in the field, they get a well-rounded sense of what's going on in police work and in their communities. And they've responded to a lot of things that would help them develop the ability to help our callers.
That makes sense. So 10 years on the job, and they have to have been, my thesaurus just broke, but basically they can't have been fired for misconduct or anything. They have to have retired in, good standing. Is that the term?
Yes, we want them to have retired in good standing, not retire in the termination or the discipline. We want them to be someone who had a really good, solid police career.
Okay. And so after, let's say somebody goes to the website, they fill out the application form. As the training coordinator, tell me what's that training going to look like for a listener or a listener candidate?
Let me finish the process for you as far as the questionnaire. Once the questionnaire is finished and submitted, then the director of Copline, Stephanie Samuel, she will make a phone call to the person who just submitted their questionnaire because she wants to vet that person and give the person the opportunity to vet Copline. Make sure that it's a good fit for both sides. If it is a good fit for both sides, then that person will be recommended to our volunteer coordinator, who then makes the calls to all the people who have been vetted through the questionnaire when a class comes up. Like, hey, do you want to go to this class in Texas? Do you want to go to this class in California? Do you want to go to this class in New Jersey? So that's how it gets started. As the training coordinator, I coordinate the classes from the standpoint of getting in touch with the students prior to the class, sending them the paperwork that they need to have, and following up with them with their needs and giving them schedules and basically being that contact person for them when they, prior to coming to the class. And then when they actually reach I try and greet them, let them know what's going on, and then get them situated before the class gets started.
That's got to be like herding cats sometimes.
It can be, but I find dealing with law enforcement professionals, even in retirement, they still have pretty much of a good sense of taking care of themselves.
That's a good thing. In a comp line class, how many instructors or role play evaluators are you also coordinating behind the scenes on average?
I usually coordinate about 12 listeners, and we have psychologists, and we have one person who's been a lifelong member of the training cadre at the Suicide Prevention Center of Los Angeles. Well, I coordinate about 12 people to help us out, making sure the training runs smoothly and making sure that everybody is well taken care of during the training.
Wow, that's along with all the participants too. So that's a lot of people that you're herding cat. Let me ask you this. Why don't you share with us a little bit about the training? Because I know as if I'm calling cop line beyond at least 10 years on the job, well-rounded career, retired in good standing, I want to know that this listener is well trained. So tell me a little bit about what this training looks like. You mentioned Texas and California. Tell us how many times these trainings take place in a year and what does that training look like?
We try to have at least 3 trainings a year, one East Coast, one West Coast, and somewhere in the middle of the country. Just for this year, perhaps, we had the training in California, the one that you attended. And then we have a training in Texas coming up in May. And then we have a training in Florida coming up in November of this year. So, like I said, we try to have 3 trainings a year. And one thing that is hard to get through to the new students is that they've spent a lifetime in their career learning how to solve problems. They go to a house or some scene and they have a limited amount of time to get the information, digest that through their experience, and then come up with some kind of solution or suggestion to help the person that they're dealing with get through their problem. And when you come to cop line training, we really want you to strip away that. We want you to be focused more on listening and trying to understand what the person is going through before you even try to offer any kind of a suggestion for help. So that could take 2 to 3 to 5 minutes just to get the person feeling comfortable talking with the listener. And so once that rapport is established, and a lot of the training is designed on helping the new listeners understand how to build rapport. Because if you don't have rapport, they could care less what you're going to talk about. So when you establish rapport with a person, then you're on that same wavelength to where they're now in tune with you and you are with them. And you can work your way through the crisis and eventually help them come up with a solution and not telling them what you think they need to do. Get them to have the solution coming from them.
But certainly having the solution come from them, I would think one of the biggest benefits is that that's a solution that's likely to work for them versus a listener giving them a solution that for any number of reasons might not be the right one for that person. But if they're coming up with it, it's more likely to be effective. Am I right in that?
You're absolutely right, because what works for me may not work for you. And so if I get you to buy into something that you've tried or that you're going to try or that you have tried, coming from you, you're more bound to stay with that type of a problem.
That makes sense. Do you have callers that have substance abuse problems? They're finding themselves drinking a lot more, or maybe they were on a IOD and injured on duty and they've been prescribed a pain medication that they realize, hey, this is becoming more dependent on this than I even realized. Do you have callers that call in with those kind of issues?
We do. We have a good number of callers that after you give them the greeting, Copline, this is Chuck, what's going on? A lot of them are crying. You can hear the clinking of ice in the glass. So you know right away that there's something going on that is a lot deeper than just the normal, I've had a bad day. So yes, we do have that. And then we have some officers who will admit to getting addicted on their legally prescribed painkillers, and it's just gone too far. And we try to help them work through that. And even if they don't have a resource that they are comfortable with, Copline has over 1,500 vetted resources that work directly with cops. So they understand what they go through day to day, and we can help them get connected with some of those resources if that's where they're at that moment. A lot of times they're not. And so they'll say, hey, I'm not ready for a resource like that, but can I call back if and when I'm ready? And we obviously tell them, yes, they can call back and request those resources at a later time.
That makes sense. I think one of the cool things is the fact that if somebody's just looking for a resource in their local area and they don't want to ask somebody at their job because they don't trust whatever psychological services are available to them, that they'll truly be confidential, or they just don't want to draw attention themselves, that they can call Copline and ask for those resources. That's pretty neat.
Yeah. If you're in an agency that has a robust peer support or a robust support services bureau or something similar to that, you're really lucky, because the majority of departments across the country, they don't have that. And in the smaller agencies, if they do have it, they don't trust them, because many times the meeting that an officer has with a peer support or with a EAP, employee assistance program provider, the information gets back to the department in some way, in some fashion. And so the confidentiality is just blown out the door. So as a Copline listener, they can be guaranteed that it's confidential. And the resources that we refer them to, they are confidential as well. Nobody is going to meet with one of our therapists that we recommend and then have them turn around and contact their chief of police or their shift sergeant or their shift lieutenant. Because you're right, they don't trust them. And if we want to make sure that trust carries over between the listener and the caller and with any resource that we provide.
It's interesting, the trust word, because as cops, one of the first things I learned very early in my career is everybody lies to us. And when you feel like you can't trust anybody that you're working with or dealing with, the fact that you now have a resource, Copline, that you can trust, that's pretty special. That's pretty cool. Let me ask you this. A lot of people experience situations that require de-escalation, calming people down. And what tools have you found that are effective when you need to talk somebody off the ledge, maybe that's calling in calling into Copline?
Like I said before, we use active listening a lot. And what that means is I listen more and talk less. And so sometimes just allowing the person to vent to me or to any listener that's on the line goes a long way toward helping them to relieve some of the pressure that they're experiencing from the most minor situation to the most aggravated situation. So in my mind, time, meaning allowing them to process what's going on in an anonymous fashion, in a confidential fashion, and where I'm not going to be judging what they're telling me. I'm not going to be forcing my solutions down their throat. I'm really focused on hearing them, not inserting my story into their problem, and making sure they know it's a safe place so that they can get what's in their head and off their chest so that they can get some breathing room, so to speak, to help figure out what the next step is.
Yeah, that whole listening without judgment, truly without judgment. And I love what you said. It's giving them some space to. It's interesting. A thought just occurred to me. I was thinking back a few months ago, I had a really bad cold. And somebody asked me if I had taken any vitamin C to help kick it. And I know all this stuff. I mean, I still maintain my EMT certification. Before I became a cop, I was a firefighter. I was an EMT. I was an ER tech. I used to teach first aid and CPR at the academy for eons and advanced officer training. So I'm really well versed in the medical field. But here I was the one that was sick, and I forgot something as simple and basic as a supplement like vitamin C. And this thought popped into my head. Sometimes, even when we know what we need to do, because our brain is shifted into survival state and the thinking part of our brain, the prefrontal cortex, the front of our brain, the logical, rational part of our brain is shut down. These thoughts don't occur to us. And so as being able to call Copline and have somebody talk through it with you to help you go, oh, I know that. I just forgot about it. I didn't think about that. Or I didn't think about that applying to my situation. That's like somebody saying, hey, Kara, did you take some vitamin C yet? I see a parallel there. Is that what
Right.
what you found working Copline, that sometimes the cops, they know this stuff, but they just forgot about it or didn't think of it?
Yeah, exactly. Sometimes the stress and even PTSD that's undiagnosed, that can really affect a person's ability to think clearly, especially when they're in the moment and they're really experiencing the effects of stress. And you're right. They know a lot of times what they need to do, but sometimes they just forget, or they just have a million other things going through their mind. And all it takes is one suggestion from a listener that will clear that cobweb and say, oh, I do have that in my life. I do have a pastor. I do have my brother who's really good, a partner. I do have my wife. I trust her. I do have a sergeant that I really get along with. So they have that resource in their life, and they just had temporarily, like you said, forgotten about it because they're so entrenched in what's in front of them, trying to deal with it. They forget the basics.
Yeah. Kind of like you can't see the forest for the trees.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. I want to dive into a couple different things, shifting gears just a little bit. How does Copline even get funded? Who pays for this? You do. I know that the listeners are volunteers, but there's got to be some hard costs that, how does that all get paid?
Glad you asked. First of all, everybody is a volunteer. Nobody takes a salary. Even our attorneys and our accountants, they all do it for free. Our fundraising, we have 3 or 4 fundraisers a year, golf tournaments, midnight runs. What anybody else thinks up to do. I think at my class, I had those lapel pins made that I was making available to the students, and all those proceeds, 100%, go back to Copline. So I'm able to, what I make off of those, including what I spent on it, back to Copline. We have some very generous donors, a couple that give high amounts, and then we really survive on the smaller donations of people that know of our service. I'm sure some of our listeners donate some of their money, as I do. So we really have a shoestring budget. Our website, our materials printing, our materials mailing out, the materials for the class. That's really our biggest expenses, and the 800 number that callers call in. So it's really a streamlined budget, and we'd like to do more, but we rely on on the generosity of the public and listeners, and just making sure that we have enough money to survive.
Got it. So what I'm hearing you say is if somebody had $20 that they're going to donate somewhere or spend on coffee that they can go without, they could donate $20 to Copline, and 100% of that is going to go toward supporting Copline. It doesn't get diverted off into somebody's pocket.
No, the host of our website, copline.org, they do it 100% for free.
Wow.
And you know how if you donate on some websites, they'll take a processing fee. The company that helps us doesn't take any processing fee. 100% of what you give goes directly to Copline functions. So yeah, you're absolutely right. If someone has $20 or $200 or we've had up to $50,000 donated, they can either send a check to the address on the website, or we have a donation button that they can do electronically from the comfort of their own home.
That's cool. And for anyone who is driving right now and you're thinking, wait a second, Chuck gave me that website at the beginning. I don't remember what it is. No stress. In the show notes, if you're watching this on a video platform, you'll see it there. Look in the show notes. You'll see the website that you can go to and you can donate. I love the fact that the payment processor isn't even taking a percentage. That's
Right.
really unusual. That's pretty darn cool. So we talked a little bit about this, but if someone wants to volunteer and they said, hey, they were listening to this podcast and they're seeing us on YouTube or Facebook or Instagram, and then they say, hey, I really want to volunteer. They just go to the website, correct? And then find the link from there about volunteering.
Yes. www.copline.org, and you hit on the volunteer button. It'll take you to questionnaire, like I explained before. And the questionnaire is very lengthy and detailed. And you really need to be as honest as you can on that questionnaire, because when our director, Stephanie Samuels, gets the completed questionnaire, she's going to call you and she's going to challenge you on the things that you put in there, just to make sure that, again, like I said, you're a fit for Copline and Copline's a fit for you. And then we do ask that you, once you get through the training, that you commit to 2 8-hour shifts a month. Another thing is that the training is completely on your dime, meaning that, the cost for travel, if you're traveling from you are to the training, which really gives a commitment on behalf of the listener, because if they're willing to pay for their flight and their hotel and subsistence for the 5 days of the training, 40 hours, that's a big commitment. And so we appreciate that. And we understand that. So we hope that they really think long and hard about whether or not this is for them, because there is an expenditure on their part to come to the training.
Yeah. And depending and it's great that you have the training on both coasts and in the middle, because that way it lessens that expense. But at the same time, 40 hours of training, it's all in person. None of it's on Zoom.
No.
And there's no guarantee you're going to make it through the training, is there?
There is not, because sometimes a student will come and after a day or two, they'll realize this wasn't for me, which is fine, or that they'll get through the training and there is some kind of a disconnect where it just doesn't fit. So there'll be a conversation at the end of the training with someone who is not quite the right fit. And then that's between the director and them. But yeah, you're right. Some people don't make it through.
Wow. Sounds like a really intense process, but at the same time, gosh, if somebody's calling in and they're, to use the standard phrase I always use, gnawing on the end of their gun. You don't want some knucklehead picking up that phone because a law enforcement officer's a brother, a sister, their life is at stake. And you want really well-trained people manning Copline, because cops are calling when they're in crisis. They need somebody good.
Exactly. You want to make sure that the person on the other end of the line has received some training and have the ability to at least acknowledge your pain that you're going through and do whatever they can to help you work through that issue. And if the caller will sense that the listener really just doesn't have it, then we've lost that person. And you don't know what information will get out about Copline just from that one bad meeting between a caller and a listener. So yes, we do want to make sure that the listeners complete the 40 hours and we put them through role playing. So we actually get a chance to see how they would react. And role playing's tough, but it is a good assessment on somebody's ability to take what's being taught in class and put it together in a scenario situation. So we want to make sure that they have the ability to accomplish that.
That's really awesome. It's great, because you have then in the training, not only is it intense with 40 hours, but the students are being evaluated every stage that they go through, both the receiving lecture, then doing the role play scenarios, which are all evaluated, resulting in pass or fail. Even if somebody's put forward the time, effort, and money to come to the training, doesn't mean they'll make it through. And that just really shows how discerning the training team is. And that comes right back to you as a training coordinator. So kudos to you for keeping those high standards.
Thank you. And I do think that we do owe it to our callers to make sure that when they pick up that phone, number one, we answer the call. And number two, we have the skill and ability to help them with their issues.
Very cool. Very cool. Just one last, or almost last question. Do you need more Copline volunteers as listeners?
Absolutely, we do. Right now we have, with the last class that graduated, we have over 135, maybe 140 listeners. We do have some listeners that started with Copline and they are starting to feel the burden of doing that continually. So we do need to have a continuous line of replacements coming in so that everybody is not stretched too far when they're signing up for their shifts. So yes, we do. We'd like to get up to over 200 listeners so that maybe the commitment is only once a month. But I think the reality is, once a listener gets the taste of helping another officer, we can't keep them off the lines for the first couple of months, which is a problem in itself because other people don't get to get a shift. But that enthusiasm to help a fellow law enforcement officer so that we don't lose another brother or sister in blue, it's a great feeling at the end of a call when the caller says, "Hey, I feel better having talked to you." And there's no greater compliment on the listener's ability to help the caller than having that being said to you. Again, we do want to have as many listeners as we can.
Which makes perfect sense. So folks, if you're a retired law enforcement officer, then by all means, hop over to copline.org and click on that volunteer button. Click on the donate button, whether you're active or retired. And anyone active or retired in law enforcement or your families can call Copline when you're in crisis. Don't let it get too far before you call. Chuck, thank you for being here. I Absolutely love what you're doing with Copline. Thank you for all of your extra work above and beyond being a listener yourself on the lines, but also being the training coordinator and the boatload of work that comes along with that. Your efforts truly are appreciated because the Copline training would not be as good as it is if you weren't there and the high standards that are being set. You're definitely having an impact in this world. So thank you for all that you do.
I appreciate you highlighting Copline and what we do. We want to get the word out because in this country, there isn't a lot of resources available for officers, and Copline is one of the best resources available for that officer, retired or active, or their family members that are having a bad day and just need to get something off their chest, or if they're at the end of their rope and they're sitting in the station parking lot with a gun in their lap and they're ready to end it. Again, thank you, Carrie, for allowing this message to go out, and I hope it reaches some people. We, one, get more listeners, and two, maybe someone will be able to donate to us.
That'd be awesome. So listeners, copline.org, get over there, volunteer if you're eligible, and everybody can donate. And again, the fact that 100% of your donation goes to benefit Copline, none of it gets eaten up by administrative costs because everybody's volunteering, including the payment processor. That's just awesome. Yep. Chuck, thanks much for being here. Listeners, I look forward to our next episode on de-escalation conversations. Be sure to tune in every Monday at 6 a.m. Pacific for a new episode. And check out, if you're just finding us, make sure that you check out our past episodes as well in the archive. Until next time, please stay safe.